video to date. I'm going to do a lot of talking at the beginning. So once I upload this, I will post right below in the description on YouTube at what time I start painting. So if you don't want to listen to me talk, or if you want to skip ahead or anything like that, just check down below and I'll say what time to skip to. Anyhow, welcome. I'm Andrew Broussard, and I'm going to be doing a watercolor painting today. However, it's mainly going to be trying to address an issue that I'm having for the most part, and I'm going to try to explain what's going on. Whenever I paint, especially lately, I've been following Carlson's guide to angles, his theory of angles, meaning that we have our light source, we have our ground, we have slanted objects, and we have vertical objects. Now, how they are in relationship to the light source helps determine their value, tonal value, in relationship to each other. Light source is going to be the lightest. Coming down, it's going to hit the ground. This is going to be the second lightest object. This is going to catch less light, so it's going to be the third lightest, so it'll be darker. And then vertical objects such as trees, for the most part, will be the darkest. So that's kind of been my approach to painting. If we were looking at a painting that I was doing, we would have our sky, which was light. We'd have our ground, which was a little bit darker. Far tree line. And then very stark dark trees. And then there'd be aerial perspective involved and whatnot, meaning that as we came forward, I'd darken my tonal values. And so darken tonal values as well as push things from cool to warm, like distant would be bluish, middle, start adding reds and yellows, and then foreground, let's say that was our green, yellow. Now, I don't always follow those colors or whatnot. It's just to give you just a very general idea. Okay, and this is all based off the idea that the light source is coming from the sky. And I enjoy the tonalism. Which often has a very extreme angle with the light source. To be very extreme where it's coming from. And the ground wouldn't catch as much light because of the angle that it's coming at. Once again, theory of angles. We'd have a very dark, almost silhouetted tree. So if we're looking head on, if you look up tonalism paintings, you'd have very dark. You'd have your object. And then because of such the dim light, maybe you have such a low light in the sky, you'd have that maybe a strong coloration from that sunset taking place. So it's kind of backlit is the term that I've heard people describe it as. And that's what I go towards from time to time. I kind of jump back and forth between these two ideas. Now, one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot, and then it starts getting me thinking about the light source itself. Whenever I drive around, whenever the sun is setting or has set, I often look at things and think that's tonalism. And whether it's the sunset, whether it's the sunrise, but also a big factor is street lamps. So I'm uploading this video, well, as I'm filming this video and it's live streaming, I'm calling it just Illuminated Within, because the light source, if we're looking down from the sky, so I'm looking straight down, our light source is that street lamp, and that's what's illuminating everything. So if we're looking straight down and also looking at the street lamp up, which I know sounds a little weird, it's going to lighten everything on this side. So let's say these are trees. So vertical objects. Vertical objects. Okay. This side is going to receive the lightest light. This side is going to receive the lightest light. This side, lightest light. It kind of gets boxed in within that space. Now, if we're viewing it this way, or from the other side, looking in from the outside, these arrows that I'm currently drawing are all going to be the darkest. And then we're going to have highlights on the ground. We're going to have things taking place. So this is the looking down view. Then this is the looking, if you're standing on the street, you have your street lamp, so that's the brightest bright. We're going to have trees behind it or alongside it that are going to catch the light. Something behind it is going to be illuminated, the trunk. Something alongside is going to have to catch half of it. Like if this is coming off of a lamppost, this light is going to extend down the side, and the left side is going to be darkened. And then anything in the foreground is going to be pretty damn dark. Can I say damn on YouTube? I think so, I just did. So that is just kind of a sketch, but then sketching the idea just now, and what has been in my mind is that the sky itself has to be dark. There's going to be some illumination in the sky because of the moon, because of ambient light, light pollution and whatnot. So one of the issues that I'm thinking is, how do we distinguish between a moon and the lamp? Okay, so that's one of the big questions that I'm going to try to address within this experiment. How do I distinguish between those two? Because I'm going to have my nighttime sky and I'm going to have my illumination, and I'm thinking that I'd have to really push forward the idea of the lamppost shape itself, the telephone pole, whatever you want to call it. Now, another thing, there's two things that I can look at, and two approaches I can take. I don't have any photos of this. We'll just call it phenomenon. Okay, I don't have any photos of this phenomenon, mainly because my cell phone doesn't take the greatest low light pictures that I'm describing these scenarios, and I don't always carry around my, what I call it, DSLR. I've had that camera for like over 10 years. It's a great camera, a Canon Rebel, I believe. But I'm not carrying it around every day, especially when I'm driving to and from work, or if I'm going to get art supplies or whatever in Lafayette. So the two scenarios that I've seen is, let's say we had low light sunset. We have the dark tree line. We have the light source hidden, not hidden, sitting below this tree line. It'd be light around it. Dark tree line. And I think, maybe we could put something in front. to kind of start getting perspective taking place. And I think that'd be maybe the easiest way to start if I did something like that. The other one is when you're closer to the tree, closer to the source, and this is going to be like, not this drawing, but the one right before it. And let's see. And there's an example of this, right? Like a block away from my house. So I need to take a photo of this one, where it's amongst the trees once again, and it's illuminating those around it. And then there's some big oaks alongside. Let's say this is the sky. Then we'd use aerial perspective to set this back further. Something like that. So there's that issue. A more ambitious one would be the road alongside my house, or looking through the trees, where you have the lampposts amongst those trees, and receding. And whenever I looked at that, the main thing that comes to mind is that I don't think you'd really want perfect straight lines with those lampposts, and unless it's maybe like a city scene and you're trying to show how pristine and man-made and organized everything is. But I would gear towards this because this shows a variation in the land itself, which would raise those poles, change those poles. It would push the angles of the poles the way they raise, rather than straight up and down. So I think that's an ambitious one because there's so many different light sources within, and it's one day something that I want to do. Did I address everything that I've talked about? Okay. If you watch my videos, you'll know that I wet the paper first. So I'm going to soak the paper, and I'm going to start putting in washes. And with it, being that it's a nighttime sky, I'm going to have to put a relatively dark wash in. Okay? So, we're going to have the dark ground, so we'll have the foreground. We're going to have a tree line, which is going to have to be, I think, quite dark on the edges, but we're going to have a light gradient as we come towards the center, because let's say our light post is right here. Okay, it's gonna catch these guys more, catch these guys less. That's the whole. If I was looking down, it'd catch the side, and it starts right back here. Would catch that. I should probably darken the actual dark side. So the back side is gonna be dark, front side light. And as we move towards the side, eventually we'll start getting extreme. And you can see the part that we see is being minimized. So this is all just logical, critical thinking that's taking place to approach this issue. I know I should go from a photo. I have my Kindle right here. We're just going to kind of flip through, I think, a few on Google. Like I literally just typed in free photo street lamps in trees. We'll see what comes up. I don't really want to paint from a photo in this just yet. I want to kind of go about this almost scientifically. I do know that, where was I with this? Okay, so I was going to put my wash in, and I put that in. Now my main issue is, I believe that I have the skill to put, or I hope that I have the skill to put in that gradiated dark to light. So I'm going to have to keep that in mind. But technique-wise, with my initial wash and putting in this dark for the sky, I'm going to have to lift that in some way, shape, or form. Okay, so I could use a lift, meaning while it's wet, use paper towel. And that'll give me, it'll pull out my white of the paper. However, that minimizes my wet and wet. So that's the potential negative of that. So if I was to come in with foreground trees, and this one wouldn't be good compositionally because it's right down the middle. But painting that in, I would still have my foreground wet most likely if I didn't dry it off. And lately I've just been letting it dry naturally within the 40-minute painting process as I do it. So I would have a very stark contrast between a softness and then very harsh edges, then softness again. So that's an issue that I would have right there. Another thing, I can lift, I can use the card for scraping. Now the scraping I would want to use for the trees to bring those out, so I could maybe put in just a dark gradient all the way across and then use the card to lift it. Because between these trees, we're going to have a starker darkness behind it. So we're going to have a variation in tone within that variated tone within. It's kind of interesting, right? Dark to light, but we're going to have a dark to light battle between those. So that's kind of cool. I think I'll have that taking place as well. And that's what would make the painting interesting. So those are my issues. Those are the approaches. I could use, is it melanin? Is it melanin foam? That's a magic eraser. That is one of these guys, which I've talked about in the past. It doesn't have any chemical properties or bleach or anything that I know of from researching it in regards to watercolor. It's just a finely grit, almost sandpaper that will take place action. So it's a little abrasive. They say not to use it on dishes and whatnot. It's probably because of the fine particles, and you probably don't want to get that in your system. But I don't think it's toxic. Anyway, so I could use the magic eraser, but I don't know. I haven't experimented with that enough to if it damages the paper. If it damages the paper to the point where I can't go back over it, we will eventually experiment with that one, but I might stay away from that today. I could use masking fluid, but I really don't want to use that. Especially, you know, some people do report issues of doing a blow dryer over that, and it causes, it's harder to lift. You could use the wax, but lifting wax, I believe you have to put a piece of paper over and iron it, and that'll melt the wax and absorb it into the paper you put on top, and that'll remove it at the end. I'm not feeling that process. And I could utilize the gouache or the Titan buff, but let's see. I always misspell gouache. I do have a tube right here that I could read right off of. Or my Titan buff, or any of those type of things. I could utilize that, but I think that might be for a future painting. We'll see. There is other issues that I had wanted to address with that, and I think the Titan buff would be good for that, but I might avoid that. So I think I'm going to do the lifting of the paper towel, And what I might try is lift and then spray into that wet area to reintroduce that water. My concern about that is the edges right there. We do have to have maybe a little bit of gradient to get a atmospheric ambient effect. So I might have to keep that in mind as well. And then color palette wise, I'm not too sure what I want to go with. I think when I see the bright lights, the street lamps, I see a mixture of like the white, I guess they're the LEDs, and then they have the more yellow soft lamps. So there's a variety in nature. And I was thinking what color that we'd have to use, because eventually we're gonna have to come in with a light wash right in that area as well. If you look at photos, you see that orange look. This is just Google, just searching things, just so I could kind of talk about like the idea that, here, let's lift up this one. This is from Pinterest. Okay, so this is Pinterest. Somebody posted this. You see how aggressively lit that is, how it lights that tree in the background, and then the far side is darker. So that just talks about the concept. Palette wise, I think we're going to utilize raw sienna, and we're going to work with our Payne's grays and ultramarine. So we got to think about how we're going to get that dark sky. We have the Venetian red, the light red on the palette already. I'll put a little bit more. That goes a long way. I think it's due to the extreme opacity of the paint itself. Liz and crimson tubes go a long way as well, but I've seen other artists say, yeah, they've had art teachers say, buy one tube and it'll last you a few years, mainly because we don't use it that much. So we got ultramarine, Payne's gray, and I've been neglecting burnt sienna lately, and I feel bad about that. Because burnt sienna was one of my go-to when I first started, where I do ultramarine, burnt sienna, raw sienna, or Payne's gray, burnt sienna, raw sienna would make a fun triad. But we probably shouldn't worry too much color-wise, due to the fact that we're looking for more of a tonal experiment. This is Sap Green. I find that when I do utilize Sap Green, I use it at the end of the painting to try to put a little bit more life into it if I've taken too much life out of it. And I'm going to use the Indithron blue, which I've just been playing around a lot with. That was kind of brought to my attention the mixture possibilities by Posey Gaines. He does YouTube videos. I think he uploads one every day. So if you like the fast and loose and the Hague painting like I do, he does some great ones. Other people that do that, David Usher, Lois Davidson, who else? Alan Owen. I don't know if he uses the Hague, but he uses the big brush, and he does that really well. Joe Menza, he does that as well. He does more of a style with Hagues and focusing on mountains and whatnot, like Bob Ross type scenes. And then there's Stephen Cronin, who I think that was the one that first got me into Hagues. He has a lot of videos. He has some books out there as well. And then fast and loose oil painting. There's Dennis Sheehan, I believe. And there's Stuart Davies. Let me turn this off. So there's a lot of different people that are producing fast and loose painting tutorials. There's I have a hard time pronouncing his last name, but it's Rick Suarez. If you do YouTube watercolor Rick, and it'll show up. He has a big active Facebook community, and I often share my videos on that as well. And he does some great paintings, but he's a great example of masking fluid. He does a fantastic job utilizing that. So if you like masking fluid, just check out his style as well. He does a really nice limited palette, from what I remember, of ultramarine and burnt sienna. And I think that's where my my love of that combination took place. And he does a great job explaining pushing dark, pushing light, warm, cool, and having variety of tone and feeling within a movement, because you kind of want to avoid flat areas. Now, that does bring me to the point of talking about this dark in between. I could go back and paint that dark in between those, either at the very end or in the wet and wet stage. And for some reason that makes me think more oil painting or gouache. So I don't know if I'm going to do that. We'll see. Now, I think I have racked my brain over this. I don't know if it tells me how long I've been filming for at this point, but I will look it up. And at this point is when we'll start painting. So I'll put this on the side. Let me grab some fresh water and I'll be right back. Alright, I'm back. I had just the paper towel that I used to write my palette down. I had dunked it back in the water, therefore not having clean water to do my wet and wet. So compositionally, I unfortunately did not come up with a plan. I kind of gave a few ideas, so we'll kind of go with the flow. Like I said, this is a very ambitious experiment painting for me, and video, where I tried to go through the thought process in real time with what my issue is, how it would be affected by the light source and whatnot. And I also talked about how we'll try to address some of those issues, those challenges. So will this painting come out good? I have no idea, but I think me sitting down doing this is beyond valuable to my painting journey. So I'm soaking the paper. This is the 11 by 14, 11 by 15 Stonehenge Aqua. I take a full sheet and I tear it into quarters. And I do that because of the availability of mats in this opening size. The mats are open a little bit less than 11 by 14. So it just works out perfectly. It makes it a lot easier. My father had given me a mat cutter, which is fantastic, and like really love it, but I just don't have the time to cut a mat for every single painting. Also, somebody commented on one of my paintings last night asking if I have an Etsy. I started mentioning that in previous videos. I just haven't made it yet, so that's hopefully the goal for this weekend. All right, I'm going to take my raw sienna and I'm going to put this more or less where I'm going to want my light source to be. My horizon line is going to be in here, but I'm going to drag it down. We're probably going to have to do a lot of pushing and pulling with colors to get stuff to sit in place. I could also expand the query that I have by looking at painters and how they address this. There is a painting from the Hudson River Valley movement where it's kind of a low light scene, and there's a campfire, like a very small campfire, I think in this location of the painting. There might be actually another painter that had done one with a campfire right in here illuminating up underneath the trees. So that would be how you would utilize historical paintings and see how they approached it or envisioned that object. And of course, there's having a photo of these things in front of you to help you out. But unfortunately, I do not have a photo. It's more of just a different approach that I'm taking. So I need my gradation in the sky. And there's not going to be so much gradation because it's the nighttime, low light. It will get darker, I think, near the top. We will have light on the horizon, lower in value. We're also going to want a gradation around that light if it's exposed to the sky for a atmospheric effect. So this is a mixture of ultramarine and raw sienna. And I'm just going to feed it in. I'm going to have to mix a lot stronger, I think. Because I really want it to say, bam, the sky is dark. And then let me mix some burnt umber with that indie blue. And put that in the sky as well. Okay, that's gonna be a nice dark. I'm not going to worry too much about clouds or anything in the sky. I just want that atmospheric effect of the darkness and the light source. I might encroach a little bit more. We'll see. So this is a lot of tickling taking place, but it's me experimenting, looking for that that value. This is the Payne's Gray. And remember, we're going to have a lightning. As time goes on, the painting's going to lighten as it dries. Let me bring some of this down for the foreground. We're going to have dark ground. We could play around with dry brush down here if we wanted to, and that would be for the purpose of light catching on the top of the grass and whatnot from this light source. Let's show that far tree line and how it's going to encroach. Now, the telephone pole will wind up probably being right here. Now let's really load this guy up with pigment. And this is Payne's Gray and ultramarine. I'm just looking to get some dark. That's one of my favorite Cajun things, is that rather than saying very dark or extremely dark, or using very poetic terms like as dark as the night itself on an unlit moon or something like that. It's very common to just say the word twice, like, oh man, that was bad, bad, or that was dark, dark. So this is the far distant one. I'm figuring that I'm going to have a mid-ground tree line, which will be illuminated. So that'll be the ones that are behind the post. Let's see what this allows us. Now the sky is dark. The far sides of the trees, not so much. And I'm sure, so like I said, some historical painters, like Hudson River Valley movement, had shown, the hunters or the fur trappers and whatnot, or people just camping, and showed them amongst these, the setting sun with their campfire. And then whenever the electric light was invented, and I know they used to have gas lamps in cities and whatnot, but I don't know how much it illuminated. But whenever they started having electric lights, that must have been a game changer for painters of the time period. It's like, oh man, what do we do? Or I think you could probably refer to J.M.W. Turner. That's the second time I mentioned him in the second video. When he had the Burning of Parliament painting, I think they were quickly done sketches. Like he was apparently reportedly running around the city doing those sketches. And he used, I think, 3 colors is what they might have said, like red, blue, yellow. But you could see, if I remember correctly, the red reflecting off the sky from the burning of the fire, the red and the yellow. So that might be a good resource. And right now, if I wanted to, I could make this probably a really extreme sunset. So if you wanted to follow along at this point and then just differentiate and start making a sunset, that would make a very stark, interesting painting. But I'm going to have to resist the urge to go in that direction because I'm on a quest to find this. Now, you see that with the wet and wet, how it starts laying in, I'm actually starting to pick up pigment. So I'm going to try to get some water out of my brush so I can get more concentrated pigments. And feed that into these. All right, so we are going to take a chance with this level of darkness. Just adding just a little textural brush strokes to kind of help me get the idea of a sunset out of my mind. Sunset over water. Because here, the main goal is to make sure, like I had said, how do I make sure that that light source isn't accidentally perceived as the moon or the sun or something like that. So, I'll have to see. Okay, so now, if I had a picture, this stage would be, I think, a lot easier. So I'm going to put the light post right in here. There's nothing on this. This is a dry brush. I'm just kind of pushing some paint around to get ideas. Actually planning out on a wet painting. I know it's kind of silly. So the light post is right here. We have the surrounding around this. I'm just going to push this around to, maybe this is a good idea. Maybe it's a little viable technique to get that atmospheric surrounding from that glow. The backside may not glow as much. So it lit the ground, but we'll probably have to put raw sienna in there and establish it as a ground. So here's the lamp, dark. I'm going to want trees behind it. I'm going to scrape those trees out in a moment. Those are going to be my lighter trees that are catching the light from it. Now, we got to see where our wetness is at. See if we can pull out the tree. I did not have to use a paper towel to pull out that area, but maybe we will. Towel right there. And that'll give us a variation within that tone of light. So we have that, and then we start having a little variation there from playing around with the rigger. We'll see at the end how that affects it. Okay, so I do feel as though I am not dry enough to put in those guys. So I'm going to take some of the darks and put that in. Just starts establishing that far trees. Now, this might be helpful by having that tree split up around that light, showing that that light is in front. So I'm just taking a little bit of water and pigment and just pushing vertical strokes into the wet and wet. And this is the trees that are behind, the far behind. We'll get a little bit of wet and wet's the scraping to get the whites. I just need to get a little bit drier. They are going to be darker at the base. A dry brush with a dark right there might give us that white highlights that I talked about earlier for the ground. Okay. These are the far trees. Okay. Now, I am going to look for a thinner cut piece of card. So rather than scraping with the round edge, I'm going to scrape with the flat side to really get that white. I had a scissor in here, but my fiance was like, "Oh, I found the knife, the scissors that we use for the kitchen. They're in the art room." I was like, No, those are the art room scissors. That's why they're in the art room. And now those scissors have made their way into the kitchen. Oh, I have a pair of scissors here. So maybe they were the kitchen scissors that made their way into the art room, migrated back to the kitchen, because I have art room scissors. I mean, if you can't laugh at yourself, right? So these are, we're going to put the base of this post right in here. So these are the ones that are going to be closer to it. If I turn it sideways, I can get a narrower line. So I'm trying to get a variety in my scrapes. Let's do one more for good luck. We'll do another one. I'll do one on this side. We could have a variation in the depth. Let's have one right here. And we're gonna have to put some dark ones, and those dark ones will in turn maybe have a little highlight on the closer edge, like I had drawn in that picture, where we'd only see a portion of it that was touched. The unfortunate thing is that this white is brighter than the white of the light source. So I'm going to most likely have to pull this a little bit wider, but also tone these guys down by taking a raw sienna wash over them. So let's wash this off. All right, one of the first washings of the brush, which is always fun to see how far you can go before you have to wash a brush. Okay, so this is raw sienna. I am going wet and wet, so I'm gonna have to be careful. You could see I had splattered some water, and it caused cauliflowers right there. So that's why we want a higher concentration of pigment and less water in the brush. You could take the hake and do that. All those people that I mentioned earlier in regards to watercolor, they have a lot of talking about hakes. You see how I'm lifting right now? I'm not getting anything down. I may have to do a dry off at this point. I could get a little color variation there, so I'll do that just for the fun of it. We could put in our the dark trees at this point, because we'll have enough, the darker enough pigment to do that. This is ultramarine and burnt sienna. Let's see if we can get that to stay. And if not, then we'll have to go next. Good time to do that little dry brush effect that I was talking about as well. Maybe make a little story, a little path. Doing this before we start drawing anything. Give yourself a reason for this light post to be amongst the trees. These are way darker back here, so let's see. Let's get the Indie Blue then. Payne's Gray. I'm just trying to get a dark. Ultramarine. Yep, so these are the trees that are further out. We could do rigger work amongst them, which we will do. Sometimes it's fun to just try to paint with just a hake. Other times, I feel like I'm severely limiting myself if I try to do it. But that's just my my skill level. So we're just taking that mixture, putting all these fun random weavings, the shadows that are gonna crouch amongst the trees. How's that for poetry for you? I also have phthalo blue on the palette. I'm not going to use that on this painting, but I sometimes use that as my dark mixture as well. So if you don't have that any blue, you can use phthalo blue with those siennas and umbers for different variation. You may get more of a green that comes from those. This is the outside edge. So unfortunately, it's still looking like a tree, a sun shining through, or a moon shining through and lighting this up, which, like I said, totally fine, but I'm gonna have to really model that lamppost well and sell that idea of what's taking place. I may have to put a bench underneath it or something like that. Just feed in those shadows. This is exciting because it should be my longest video to date, and I know that I talk a lot about fast and loose and proponents and whatnot of those characteristics, but I think all that talking at the beginning might have helped me put some of these ideas down, and hopefully it gave you guys an idea of my thinking process, my thought process, and how maybe y'all can think or create your own thinking process for painting. Oh, that was very wet, so that's going to cause an issue right there. Let's get try to get as much pure raw sienna we can on this. I don't want to really create too much of a solid line. I want some variation in that. This kind of helps set back that white on that tree a little bit. And if you find this part calming and soothing, somebody had commented on the last one saying that they really enjoyed the rigger work and the calligraphy type strokes. So you know, feel free to have fun with that. Okay, let's go back to our hake. Let's see if we can get the darks. It's going to be darker back in here. And think about, I mean, this one's just made up, but think about, you know, if you have foliage at the base of trees, and then you have the foliage again at the top. Do some more of that dry brush for interest. We are going to have to put some raw sienna, and I can mix it with I think I might remix it with the light red to give it more opacity and body to it. And this will be the foliage that is caught by that light. So it's kind of enveloping that spot. We might have a little bit caught on the outside in the far skirts as we gradiate out. Also tempted to pour out some, I don't know if I mentioned it, some black, like lunar black or something like that, but I do want some foreground trees as well, so I'm going to go super dark with them. If I did lunar black on the edges, you know what? Let's do it. Let's see what black we have over here, because we are experimenting. We are having fun. I'm having a lot of fun. I have some Prussian blue that is not black. I have lamp black, which we will use instead of lunar black, because we're going to go with the play on words, where we have a street lamp, lamp black. I think lamp black comes from, I don't know if it's carbon based, you know, from like the soot and whatnot originally. Because there's, what's the other one? Ivory black? I think ivory black was from the burnt bones and whatnot. I have it on the far outskirts. Let's mix it a little bit with that raw sienna on the palette, which is pretty cool. The thing is, and I think it was Burge Harrison that said this, was you'll have the center of interest and then everything kind of fades away from there. Burge Harrison had wrote that book in 1909, 1908. I'm just taking the mixture of that, and I'm going to play with that in here as well. The moment of truth is coming where I have to model that street lamp. And that's going to be fun. And by fun, that's going to be probably, if there's a stressful moment for this one, even though it's just a lot of exploration and playing around, I think that will be my stressful moment. So let's see. I'm going to take a mixture. I want a dark. I don't want it to be, I don't know if the word's ephemeral, where it's, I want this to be that solid thing that is creating everything else. I'm relatively dry right there. I am left-handed. I do have a tendency to put my hand on my palette. You can take a brush and lean it on the edge. There's also this thing called a artist maul, MAHL, I believe, and it's a long thing with a soft end for you to rest your hand on if you're trying to do very specific work. And that's the first time I've ever utilized this hand resting technique. You may have noticed that I stopped talking. Okay. We could, so I was talking about how we wanted to really tell us that it is a lamppost. And I'm doing this from memory or imagination. My grandfather up in New York had a lamppost that he had installed in his front yard. And he would turn it on at night. And I think we refer to it as the lamppost. Okay. So that was kind of last minute drawing it like that. Originally it was going to be a spot of light from just a glow lamp, but this is going to make it a little old-timey. I'm going to take that raw sienna feed a little bit of variation in there. Lemon yellow I think would work good in there. Let's recently helped my friend put pilings in. I guess they're essentially like the lampposts, very big. He had a big pond installed on his property, and he had a levee put in all the way around his property as well because of all the the flooding that we get down here. And he had flooded back I think in 2016, and we had that big flood. Anyway, so we were putting those pilings in, and those pilings, one end would measure a diameter of, let's say, 8, and the other one would measure a diameter of 7.5. There's actually a tapering that takes place. I'm not sure if that is for helping with its center of balance, where you put the wider end in the ground and then work your way up, But, so we're putting those pilings in, and that was fun. We used a handheld auger that he had ordered to dig the holes and put the posts into the ground. And it was a fun project. We had to put in then we did we attached all the pieces together. He's making it where on one side of this dock that he's installing has an actual boat launch, the boat lift out of the water spot added to it. As a school teacher, seeing that and helping him out with that, I realized that I may have gone into the wrong profession. But great guy. I do a lot of paintings on his property, a good friend of mine. And it was really a learning experience He's older than me, and one of the other guys, his brother-in-law that was helping, was a physicist as well. You know, like one of my degrees is in physics. My degree is in math and physics, so technically I'm a mathematician and a physicist. I just say that I'm Andrew Broussard, BS, with Bachelor of Science. But what was I going on about? Okay, yeah, one of the guys, his older brother, the stepbrother, no, brother-in-law, was a physicist, and the other guy works with him, and they're good friends. And it was so interesting. Like I'm in my 30s. I love working with older guys or older women, and seeing their thought process. Yeah, because we had to come up with ways to, once we started attaching everything, we had to come up with ways to square off all these big poles that were, some of them must have been 13 feet in the air, give or take. Yeah, they were high up there, and we were attaching them, and we wanted to square everything off, and seeing their thought process and logic was really cool. So whenever you get a chance, always listen to older people's advice, because they've been there before. I mean, take it with a grain of salt, I mean, there's some old people out there that are idiots. No offense if you're watching this and you're old and you're an idiot. But and I'm really enjoying this. This is just such a fun process. You can probably hear the giddiness in my voice. And we're going to have a few foreground trees where, okay, so what was I getting at? Yeah, so, older people that have done this stuff before, and I'm sure one of the countless books I have on my bookshelf in regards to painting has addressed this issue and talked about it. And I'm sure if I asked very nicely, I could get one of the other YouTube painters to discuss this process and see how they would approach it. In fact, maybe I might pose it as a challenge. Just say, hey, listen, here's a challenge. I want to see how you guys would paint a nighttime lamppost scene. Maybe I'll have to take a picture. I'll bring out the camera, take one, and post it as a challenge as well. Another thing, always, I mimicked that right there. I got a little distracted. I did was wipe where that connection was. That helped me break that up. What was I saying? Yeah, always be supportive of fellow artists. I don't mean you have to go out and buy artwork by fellow artists and whatnot, but and I know it's challenging, and if you do competitions and all, that's competitive and whatnot. But at the end of the day, have fun, ask questions. There's really no secrets that I hide from anything that I do. I think we're in a day and age where we could share a lot of information with each other and really grow as artists and as a community. Where back in the olden days, they would all sit around and hang out at the salon or paint and whatnot and discuss techniques and ideas. Nowadays, I could log on right online and talk to somebody from England that's watercolor painting and see what they think about that, or watch a video. So we may be in the golden age of art, where art that would never see the light of day. Thousands of people can now see it if you share something online, which is really cool. So at this point, it's literally just tickling, seeing how those foreground trees dry. Trying to go on the darker end. In fact, I'm going to use the lamp black in these mixtures now, just because I had introduced it earlier. So I'm going to use that to darken things up. And with rigger work, just come up with like a general idea. Here everything's going up from the ground, coming out, swooping up. Could probably get a little bit of black foliage in here because these are behind. I will highlight with a little bit on that inside edge. That might be a little bit too pure, but let's see. You could also scrape a few select highlights. You probably should have a tree coming up back here as well. If you want, you can drop the card on the floor. Now it's kind of just cleaning everything up. Okay, so we have that dark foliage. We have our lamppost. We're going to have our darks along the edge. That's not going to be seen because of the mat. This side might. Let's bring up this lamp black. Mix it with a bit of color. In addition to riggers in the trees, I really enjoy rigger foreground work. Because in nature, nobody's out there mowing every day. Second painting in a row where I mentioned mowing. I'm excited about this one. I hope you all are too. If you have any questions, comments, or ideas, feel free to post them in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. think it'd be wise to now call this one done. We did a lot of experimentation with it. We learned a lot of things. I don't usually plan out in this fashion like I had done, but I think it was extremely beneficial talking through that process. If you're wearing earbuds, just be careful. There, I'm going to kick it up a notch. Oh man, we put on a lot of pigment. Let's sign here. We'll put it underneath the mat. We will adjust the camera so you all can see. Let's bring this pen back in the other room. It's one of my daily writers. Okay, let's put that here. Oh man, okay, so I'm gonna adjust this up, and then I'm gonna take a picture to post at the front of this whenever I upload to YouTube. So let me take this out of here and just hold it up for y'all to see. Well, I hope you enjoyed. Feel free to like, subscribe, follow. Down below I have a Patreon account if you'd like to donate anything. Also, PayPal link if you want to send anything my way for art supplies. Soon I will hopefully have a link down below for Etsy as well. Alright, hope you enjoyed. Have a great day.